Winter's coming, so are the U.S. elections. So how about diplomacy? It's UN week in New York, and before heading to Washington, Ukraine's president trying to rally support for what he's branded as his victory plan. How much support, how much leverage? On the battlefield, Ukraine's on the back foot in the brutal battle for Pokrovsk in the east, but has scored a huge moral blow with its cross-border incursion into Russia's Kursk region. We'll begin with France 24's exclusive report there. And of course, we'll ask our panel if any deal can be struck, whoever the next occupant of the White House may be, whether it's all down to who, in fact, sits at the Kremlin. Today in the France 24 debate, can Ukraine convince? Joining us from the Ukrainian capital, Inna Sovsun, Member of Parliament, Deputy Head of the Golos Party. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Retired General Dominique Trinquant is the former head of the France's United Nations military mission. Thank you for joining us. You know all about UN weeks. Former French ambassador to Russia, Jean de Glignasti, today director of research at the IRIS think tank, the French Institute for International and Strategic Affairs. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
And from Washington, he was on the White House National Security Council a decade ago when Russia invaded Crimea. Charles Kupchan, senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, professor of international affairs at Georgetown University. Welcome to the show.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Reminder, if you don't want to watch the France 24 debate, that's okay. You can always listen to it wherever podcasts are streamed. Before we go to our panel, let's go to the front line. After a summer of setbacks, we had that surprise August incursion into Russia by Ukraine. It proved a huge boost for morale. How's it going now? France 24 senior correspondent Catherine Norris-Trent says.
In an armoured vehicle speeding down a bomb-cratered road, we're heading into territory proudly seized by Ukraine.
We're being taken by the Ukrainian army into Russian territory, into the Kursk region, part of which they've been occupying since the beginning of August, when Ukraine mounted a lightning offensive and breached the Russian border in a move which surprised many of Ukraine's allies.
We pass Russian road signs and see plumes of smoke on the horizon. We're taken to two villages in Kursk we're not allowed to name for security reasons. Ukrainian officers tell us some 2,000 Russian civilians remain in the areas they control. Some locals come to collect food parcels, but are largely suspicious or hostile to the Ukrainian troops.
Putin is Putin. He's a great guy. What can I say about him? He knows what he's doing.
Why don't you just take us all out and shoot us? You think everything's our fault.
Alexei is the Ukrainian commander charged with overseeing the Russian population here. He tries to convince them of the realities of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Россия показывала освобожденный якобы населенный пункт, там вообще ни одного двора не осталось. В Бахмуте, в других городах Украины, там, где побывали россияне. То же самое было в Киевской области. Ирпень, Буча.
В руках Украины?
Нет, это неправда.
Неправда?
Нет, это неправда.
Ну, давайте дальше.
For 20 years, they've been suffering from Russian propaganda, from the large quantity of lies that were poured into their ears and minds.
President Zelensky says that Ukraine has taken more than 1,300 square kilometers inside Kursk. Russia disputes those figures, but Ukraine has taken over scores of settlements. The situation on the ground remains unstable. We're hearing quite a lot of artillery fire and battle sounds from not too far off.
Alexei takes us to see some of the damage from the ongoing fighting.
This house was bombed last week. When I arrived, it was still smoking. In the settlements where the Ukrainian military is stationed, the shelling is constant. We didn't even go to the larger town today because there are so many drones attacking there.
It's unclear how long Ukraine can hold this territory. Russian troops are massing for a counter-offensive to take back all of Kursk, which is already underway. Ukraine hopes this will draw them away from other fragile front lines.
It's been several weeks, General Tankal, since you were first here to comment on this incursion, this surprise incursion into Kursk. Watching that report, is your view of it today the same as it was a few weeks back?
Yes, I think we were surprised by this attack, but I'm more surprised now that the Russians are not able to take it back. I mean, we have been, next week it will be 2 months since these attacks happened. And
not able or not interested for the time being?
Not able. Not able. They have no reserves, operational reserve ready to strike the Ukrainian. That's the first point. Second point, they had to organize the region and they had to put together forces, company level, coming from Kherson, Kaliningrad, even the brigade from Burkina Faso, meaning they are taking pieces of forces everywhere and they have to reorganize that. And that's why they were not able. Perhaps they will be able in the future, but I was surprised by the fact that they don't have a reserve ready to strike an operation like this one.
This is a press tour because we're going there with the Ukrainian army. What was your reaction though when you saw the commander there speaking with the locals, showing them videos of what's going on, of what the Russians have done on the other side?
I think it's nice to try to convince the people that the war is a bad thing, that Putin taken a bad decision. But this will have no effect in Russia, in fact. These people are just, of course, they are talking, look at the pictures. But, I was talking with someone who's coming back from Russia just a week ago, and she was telling, nobody's talking about war in Russia. In the villages, she was between St. Petersburg and Moscow, and she talked once about war with someone who was fighting and was coming back, and he was the only one talking about war. All the other people ignore completely the fact that there is a war.
Ina Sovsun, your reaction to what that you just heard there?
Well, first of all, it was very interesting reporting on your side as well. And I appreciate that you did make an effort of going there. And I think it is important to point out exactly what the Ukrainian commander on that video was doing. He was showing that Ukrainian forces that have taken parts of the Kursk region have not destroyed that region. Unlike the Russians, who, when they take over the region, this region is left completely destroyed after their incursions, wherever they go. And this is a huge difference between Ukrainian forces and then the Russian forces. This is this shows very different approaches of the Ukrainian and the Russian army, the different values that we share. The Russian army comes to destroy the country. Ukrainian army is taken over the Kursk, part of the Kursk, of course, is part of the strategic thinking in terms of further military and diplomatic efforts to end this war. But it does show that is a very different, value system behind that. But I do agree with what was just said, that I doubt that those small conversations with the members of the public in the occupied villages in Kursk region, that they will actually have a huge impact on the Russian population in general. Unfortunately, they indeed have been brainwashed for 20 years or even longer than that. I know, I grew up in Kharkiv. Kharkiv is 40 kilometers from the Russian border. There are multiple families who have relatives in Russia. They used to travel there pretty often. And then First, in 2014, there was the first big wave of people losing touch with their families. But then, of course, after February 2022, I've heard so many family stories where family members, brothers and sisters, would be saying that, brother living on the Russian side, and then there is a Ukrainian family living in the Ukrainian side, and the brother would say, my sister is a Nazi because she's living in Ukraine, just because she lives in Ukraine. And those as close as brothers and sisters, parents and children. So this shows how deep this propaganda has got into the Russian society and how completely brainwashed they are, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I want to get back to it when we talk about attempts to try to find a diplomatic solution. First, though, just another word about what's going on the battlefield. Authorities in the eastern Donbass region in Ukraine deny that Russian forces have reached the outskirts of the town of Vuhledar. Still, the images from Russian milibloggers show that the place is under pressure. Moscow claims to have captured 2 villages nearby. That's on top of that push for Pokrovsk, a key logistics hub in the east. And if we look at the map, Charles Kupchan, you heard earlier that Dominique Trinquant talking about Russia's inability to take back parts of Kursk, but they're still pressing on in the Donbass.
Well, part of the reason that the Russians are unable to take back Kursk is that they haven't diverted their best troops from the battlefield in Donbass back into Russia to try to take back this chunk of territory. And that's because I assume Putin and his military commanders have decided that there is greater military and strategic value to continue pressing forward on the front line in Ukraine and save to a later time an operation to take back the Kursk region from Ukrainian forces. We understand that one of Zelensky's goal here was to divert forces from the front line to get the Russians to send more troops back into Russian territory, and that hasn't happened. And the bottom line here is, and it's not good news, the Ukrainians have been losing territory now for the better part of the last 20 months. Little by little, a town here, a town there, but the situation on the battlefield is not good when it comes to who's gaining and who's losing. And I think because there doesn't appear to be a clear path to a Ukrainian victory, that is to say, no single weapon, no single decision by NATO or the US that can turn this situation around, that many people, myself included, believe that this is a war that ultimately is going to end at the negotiating table with a ceasefire. And that the goal ought to be to put Ukraine in as good a position as possible on the battlefield to block any further Russian advantages, to make clear to Putin that he's not going to take more territory. And when that stalemate emerges, that's probably when we're going to see both sides ready to move to the negotiating table.
At the heart of this victory plan, as Volodymyr Zelensky has called it, he's kept most of it under wraps, but we know he's going to be asking for a green light to be able to use long-range missiles deep inside of Russia. Charles Kupchan, in the last hour, the Russian president talking about an update to Russia's nuclear deterrence doctrine and warning that allies who supply conventional weapons could be considered co-belligerents. Is this noise or is this serious?
I think it's mostly saber rattling. And going back to the beginning of this conflict in February 2022, Putin has said, we have all the weapons in our arsenal at our disposal. And effectively, he's trying to deter the United States and its European allies from doing more to support Ukraine because of the possibility of escalation, either a Russian decision to use a nuclear weapon or a Russian decision to widen the war and go against NATO. The U.S., its allies have not been deterred. At the same time, one does have to worry about escalation, and that's why I think President Biden has moved carefully. HIMARS, first no, then yes. Tanks, first no, then yes. Longer range ATACMS, these are longer range missiles, about 200-mile range. Now we can use them in Ukraine, but not yet in Russia. My best guess is we'll probably get to the point where the US and its allies give permission to Ukraine to take longer strikes, in part because it's a way of bringing the war home to the Russian population. But yes, I do think that escalation is a concern and that we have to take seriously the prospect of some kind of crazy Russian action if, in fact, we see strikes deep inside Ukrainian territory. Bottom line here, though, is that this is, what the goal here, he has to be to convince Putin that he's not going to get any further. Seems to me that's how we're going to see this war ultimately grind to an end.
Jean de Grigny, you agree?
Yes. I think there is a real risk of escalation. I think also that the red line, there is no real red line from Russia. It's blurred. And perhaps it's the first time it's so clear.
Is that how it was during the Cold War? Were the red lines blurred or were they defined and obvious?
During the Cold War, you had war by proxy and no troops and no arms directly committed to the war from Russia or USA. This time it's perhaps a bit different. But anyway, the blurred red line is all the more dangerous. And that's why I think there is a real nuclear risk. But not now. Not now. The risk is, in fact, the fact that the West thinks that Russia has no red line, and as he said, Mr. Kupchan said, we said yes, we said no first, and yes after for the tanks, for the planes, and now perhaps for the long-range missiles. And the Russian thinks that we are afraid of a nuclear war. So this kind of misunderstanding can be very dangerous.
Dominique Trinquant.
I think the fact that after 2.5 years of war, Russia is changing its position like that, it's a proof of weakness. They know that they are on the fringe of not winning. I'm not saying being defeated, but not winning. And so that's why they are changing, co-belligerence, nuclear power. Of course, we've got to be cautious about each time when we're talking about nuclear power. But I think really, if Putin is saying that, it's because he's currently weak. You know that, of course, on the ground in Potrovsk for 3 months, 4 months, they have been fighting. They are still at 10 kilometers from Potrovsk, so it's very slow. They've got a lot of wounded and killed in this operation because they want to advance. I think that clearly the Ukrainians have made a choice. We will lose a bit ground there, but we'll show that we are able to fight and to have a victory. And even if it's a tactical victory, of course, and we don't know in 2 months what will be the rest of this victory. But I think this is a clear strategic choice.
Ahead of the Volodymyr Zelensky's presentation to his U.S. counterpart at the White House later this week, the Ukrainian president at the United Nations talking up what he dubs as his victory plan. Again, he wants the green light on the use of long-range missiles. He wants the guarantee of a NATO membership, the rest under wraps for now. Tuesday, and here you saw the images, this was before a special session of the Security Council, Russia's ambassador to the United Nations dismissing all the attention given to what he described as, quote, a hackneyed Ukrainian issue.
Western countries could not refrain from poisoning the atmosphere once again, trying to fill airtime with a hackneyed Ukrainian issue, which the rest of the world sees as such. The only reason behind their convening this meeting is to provide Volodymyr Zelensky with yet another concert stage at the United Nations, and this time in the chamber of the Security Council.
Let me ask you, Ina Sofsun, when the Russian ambassador to the UN talks about the hackneyed Ukrainian issue, which you could also call, the overblown Ukrainian issue, is this a provocation or is that what he actually believes?
I don't know what he believes. I know that this is his typical way of speaking. He has been disrespectful, extremely disrespectful before. There is nothing that would surprise me about what he would say. He has been extremely manipulative. He's been a good servant to his own government. Has been always distorting the truth and using the UN as an arena to do that. So I'm not surprised, and I do believe that this just shows to what extent the UN as an institution is not capable of addressing when someone is clearly saying lies and disregarding the whole mission of the institution of the United Nations, and there is nothing that can be done about that. So it's not surprising. What is disappointing, of course, is that we do not see a way to react on the side of the UN, and that is, of course, showing the weakness of the current system of international law and international relations. And if I may, I want to comment shortly on what was said by the colleagues in the studio before regarding the victory plan and whether there is or should be a fear of escalation. I'll tell you this. I have been living for 11 years now in the country at war. This is the reality for all of us here. We had thousands of people being killed. We have 1 million who are obliged to serve in the armed forces. We are getting daily attacks in our cities with the daily news about new people being killed. That is escalation already. We are not fearing escalation because escalation is what we are living through for the last 3 years. And I'm extremely disappointed to hear that people are still listening to Putin's bluff about there will be escalation. He's been using this line for many years now. If you remember, when Finland and NATO, Finland and Sweden decided to join NATO, Putin was saying, this is the red line for us. We will have to react. And then they were, voicing the nuclear threats. And then Finland and Sweden joined NATO and nothing happened. Then they said the crossing of the Russian border into Russian territory, that would be the red line for us. But then nothing happened. Ukrainians moved into Kursk region and nothing happened. They were saying that if there will be missile attacks into the Russian territory, this will be the red line for us. Well, Ukrainians using our own missiles, our own drones, have been successfully attacking their weapon storages, their depots of ammunition. Most recently, one big hit in Tvera region just a week ago, and that turned out not to be the red line. So there have been so many, mentioning of this red line for Putin by Putin himself that it's weird for me to hear that it still works. This line still works, and it works to the benefit of Putin because this debate of escalation, this fear of escalation, it actually leads to the decisions that could help Ukraine, them being delayed to an extent where they are not that useful any longer.
Ina, you understand that we have to. Ina, you understand that we have to broach the topic because our viewers who don't follow Ukraine as closely, obviously, as you do, who are in the thick of it, they're worried. Russia's a nuclear power.
Yes, it is, but it doesn't mean that it should be threatening the whole world. It doesn't mean that it should be a dictator that everybody is afraid of. And it also does not mean that it is ready to use its nuclear weapon. If it were ready to use it, it would have used it by now. But they're not doing that. And the fear that they will try to do that are extremely, extremely overrated to the understanding of everyone here in Ukraine. So I would suggest that we just drop this fear of escalation and do what is necessary to stop this war. And attacks on the depots of weapons is actually the most successful and the most, the cheapest way to stop this war. Just like recent Ukrainian attacks on the Russian ammunition centers have showed, we actually have seen the decrease in the number of attacks in the Ukrainian cities after several attacks on the ammunition centers in Russia. So it works. It works with the Ukrainian ammunition. It will do even better job if we had more ammunition to use, including that supplied by the Western partners.
Charles Kupchan, you agree that those long-range missiles could help
Well, I agree with Ina that the red lines have so far been crossed repeatedly and Putin hasn't responded. But I don't think it was imprudent for President Biden to observe those red lines. Listen, this is a dangerous war. This is the most dangerous moment we've seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And as a consequence, I think we do need to tread carefully. And I think Washington has gotten it right by gradually increasing the flow and the sophistication of weapons to Ukraine, by giving Ukraine the right to hit a broader range of targets. And I agree that under the right circumstances, strikes on Russian depots that are far behind the line may be militarily useful. But let's be honest here. There is no game changer. There is no sudden weapon that we can give to Ukraine that's suddenly going to turn this around and allow Ukraine to expel Russian forces from its territory. So we have to ask, what is the military utility here? And it seems to me the utility is to strengthen coercive diplomacy, to enable Ukraine to hurt Russia so that Russia decides that ultimately it's better off ending this war than continuing this war. But I don't think it is strategically imprudent to worry about escalation. And I do think that both sides will ultimately realize that we need to get to the negotiating table. I don't believe that Ukraine should at any point make a territorial concession, but I do think for now we need to define success as blocking further Ukrainian advances and making sure that the 81% of Ukraine that is still Ukraine is a stable, defensible, prosperous democracy. And then we save to a later day how to get back the 18, 19% of the country that is still occupied by Russian forces.
Very briefly, Ina Sovsun, you agree?
Well, I will just comment briefly on the military necessity of these strikes. The military necessity for me, as a person living in Kiev, who has been living through multiple attacks on the city, on the attacks that have destroyed children's hospital, housing, everything else, it actually is much safer place to be when there are no missiles flying above my head. So it does have a military consequence, because if they don't have the missiles to attack us with, if their planes are not taken off because they are afraid of attack on their airfields, then they will not destroy Kiev. Then maybe they will not continue to destroy our energy infrastructure, which has been very badly damaged, with us losing half of our generation right now. So it does have the military component to that as well, because it will make a huge difference in terms of the situation over here in Ukraine, in terms of our economic resilience and human resilience.
So, Dominique Tancon, do you agree with Charles Kupchan, a little bit more military pain than negotiations?
Yeah, yes, exactly. I think at this point of the war, it will be very difficult for Ukraine to regain the ground lost and occupied by the Russian. But at the same time, the Russians have lots of difficulty to go further, a few kilometers, but not much further. So, in fact, striking in the back of the Russian forces, logistic, ammunition depot, fuel, etc., will diminish the capacity of the Russian and can push them to negotiate. And I agree that anyway, there will be a negotiation. It will be not a victory. That's why I think the plan proposed by Mr. Zelensky, the name is bad. It's not a victory plan. It's a peace plan. It's a negotiation plan, but not a victory plan, because the victory for the Ukrainian now is regaining all the ground, and I think it's not possible.
All right, it could be, the beginning of the bargaining process, if you will. In his speech before the UN General Assembly earlier, Volodymyr Zelensky calling out other plans, most notably calling out by name China and Brazil at the rostrum of the General Assembly.
When some propose alternatives, half-hearted settlement plans, so-called sets of principles, it not only ignores the interests and suffering of Ukrainians, who are affected by the war the most, it not only ignores reality, but also gives Putin the political space to continue the war.
It's quite bold to call out China in particular, because before the war, that was Ukraine's #1 trading partner.
Yes.
Calling out China at the rostrum of the General Assembly, if I'm not mistaken, that's a first for Volodymyr Zelensky.
Yes, the first time is so blunt, but he dismissed their plans, but also he courts the Indian plans, and he tries to obtain from India the venue of the next conference of peace. But India doesn't want to. I mean, India has to sign the communique, declaration, ending the first conference. Up to now, they refuse to do that.
Well, according to Politico, they spoke to a high-level Ukrainian official who spoke on the condition of anonymity. India could be favorable to some kind of mediation process. The news site quotes a source as saying the Prime Minister Modi, had summertime discussions, and while Ukraine would inevitably need to compromise, what General Trinquant was talking about a moment ago, on some things to end Moscow's onslaught, any proposal to end the war should not include giving up territory to Russia.
Of course.
This is what India is saying.
Not necessarily includes giving up territories. They said that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's the first step in the negotiation. If you want to be a mediator, you have to say that at first. But on the long run, everybody knows that there will be a territorial compromise.
Ines Sovsun, you know the expression, diplomacy happens in the dark. So I guess the rostrum of the General Assembly is not the place where you announce what's going on in back channels. But your thoughts on these competing plans?
Well, those competing plans do get lots of coverage and discussions internally here in Ukraine. There are multiple discussions as to whether those plans are realistic or not. We understand that those plans are proposed by different actors because of their geostrategic, geopolitical reasons as well, and including Prime Minister Modi. He clearly wants a big role on the international arena, and the question would be which role that would be. But if he decides to play mediator, that does work for us. So we understand that there should be a solution to this war. Trust me, we are the nation, we're the people who are most interested in finding the solution to this war. We never wanted to live through this war. But the question is which of the plans is realistic? And if the plan automatically suggests that Ukraine should give up part of its territory, it's a problem not just for Ukraine, it's a problem for the whole international community, because it basically undermines the sanctity of the borders, and then it creates problems for many other nations. And that is why I think even the Chinese plans, they do mention that the respect for the sovereignty of the territory of different countries. So nobody is playing with this idea of giving up territory openly, because everybody understands that this will create challenges for those countries as well. But the question is which countries do have a leverage over Russia? And over here, we understand that there are not so many countries that actually have this leverage, China being one of them. Unfortunately, they chose basically not to intervene. Prime Minister Modi did visit Kyiv, by the way, in the summer, 2 months ago, which was quite a big event. And I think that is one of the reasons why there are debates that maybe he would be the mediator in this negotiations.
Again, diplomacy happens in the dark. Dominique Trinquant, when the Oslo Accords came to be, public opinion didn't even know that Spain and Norway were negotiating, were mediating.
Exactly. I think the General Assembly in New York, it's a very good place to have this darkness in order to be able to discuss. I don't know how far they will be able to meet, but when I was in New York, I was very often very surprised to see diplomats from Iran talking to US, in a hotel very close to the Security Council. So this happened very often. So I think this is the good place. This is a good time. I'm not sure that it will be now, perhaps next year, I don't know. But you have to link people. You have to have people able to talk to each other.
All right, on the sidelines of UN Week, Zelensky meeting with lots of leaders, including the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. on the heels of a recent pledge of 397 million euros in extra military aid by Berlin. The signals out of Germany, though, mixed. Back in July, a provisional budget unveiled. It called for German aid to Ukraine to be cut to 4 billion euros next year from the current 8 billion. Berlin hoping the rest can come from frozen Russian assets. Again, there's the idea, when you look at the money, Jean de Grignesti, that is this the moment, is Germany already getting Ukraine fatigue, or?
Yes, it's true. I mean, at least 1/3 of Germany, that is to say the eastern part of Germany, they are fed up with the war. You know, the Russians left a strong footprint in the eastern part of Germany. Unfortunately, Scholz won the election in Brandenburg.
The regional elections last Sunday,
but he lost two other Länder, and so he has to adjust. Anyway, I mean, the opinion is widely shared that, the situation is almost ripe for the start of negotiation. Some believe that they have to strengthen Ukraine for this negotiation, but everybody believes. Look at the French president, for instance. During the Forum for Peace 2 days ago, he said that we have already to think about the next structure of peace, including Russia.
And we'll be hearing Emmanuel Macron at the podium at the UN General Assembly shortly. Before New York and Washington, Ukraine's president over the weekend visited a munitions factory in Joe Biden's hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania. There, in the company of the state's Democratic governor, Zelensky autographed missiles intended for the front in Ukraine. It's all with an eye to November 5th in that U.S. presidential election. By the way, Donald Trump also in Pennsylvania this week at a Monday rally near Pittsburgh. The Republican nominee commented on Ukraine.
I see Zelensky is here. I think Zelensky's the greatest salesman in history. Every time he comes into the country, he walks away with $60 billion. Billion! Walks in with $60 billion. He wants them to win this election so badly. But I would do differently. I will work out peace as president-elect. If I win this election, the first thing I'm going to do is call up Zelensky and call up President Putin, and I'm going to say, you got to make a deal. This is crazy.
Charles Kupchan, there you heard Donald Trump saying Zelensky's rooting for Kamala Harris to win. Your reaction?
Well, I'm sure that he is rooting for Kamala Harris, and that's because Donald Trump, when he was president, was ready to throw Ukraine under the bus, and he said he doesn't want to keep supplying aid to Ukraine. One of the reasons that Zelensky went to Pennsylvania, went to Scranton, is because there is a dynamic here that is trying to convince American voters that a lot of the money that is allocated to Ukraine aid gets spent here in the United States, buying artillery shells, buying Patriot interceptors, and that is all true. And I think the big mistake that Trump makes is that he doesn't understand that for Ukraine to be safe, for Ukraine to have the wherewithal to negotiate an end to this conflict, it's going to need aid for the foreseeable future. Because even if there is a deal, we can't trust the Russians. They may try this again a year from now. So I think the long-term goal here is to keep the aid flowing to Ukraine, to make sure that Putin never tries this again, simply because he can't win. I do think
on that point, Charles Kupchan, on that point, the Newswire is reporting that we heard the clip there of Donald Trump, but that aides to the Republican candidate advisors have been in New York, speaking on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, as well with some of the world leaders. Is what we're hearing from Trump what Trump really thinks?
I think it is. I think he's naive in believing that he's going to be able to call Zelensky and Putin on day one and strike a deal. I think he's naive in believing that he could trust Putin to hold whatever deal may be negotiated. But as you were discussing in your conversation just a second ago, there is a bit of a softening in terms of public support for aid to Ukraine. You see it in Germany, you see it here, you see it in Hungary, you see it in Slovakia. And this is another reason that I think Ukrainians have to try to reduce the violence, try to move to negotiations, because they can't count indefinitely on Western assistance. I think what they can count on is a glide path to keep Ukraine safe once this war comes to an end. That, to me, is what we should be focusing on over the next few months.
Ina Sovsun, how important is the U.S. presidential election for the fate of your country?
Well, it is critical. The situation in Washington, D.C., what decisions are made there is critical for Ukraine defense. Of course, we are grateful to other partners, including Germany, which is now the second biggest supplier of weapons to Ukraine, the UK, that has been driving this support for 3 years now in terms of political drive, France and everybody else. But the truth is that about 70-80% of the military aid does come from the United States. So without that aid, we are very much aware of our prospects on the battlefield. So the situation in DC is very important. We are following the elections in the US very closely, and of course we are concerned with some of the comments that we are hearing about, specifically the claim that Ukraine is doing that because it's the President Zelensky being the great salesman. I'm not from President Zelensky's party. I'm actually in opposition to him, but I do admit that what he's doing when he's asking for weapons is not doing because he likes it, because he enjoys it, but because it's a matter of survival for us. So I do think that it's critically important what happens in Washington D.C. President Zelensky does understand that. That is why he did travel to the U.S. Right now to present the plan on how Ukraine can proceed, and just exactly because we understand how critically important that is. But I would comment shortly on what Mr. Kupchan said. I do agree with him that it is critically important to ensure that aid to Ukraine is provided on the long-term basis. Because indeed, even if there is some sort of peace or ceasefire decided on today, a month from now, half a year from now, it doesn't mean that Russia will not attack in 5-6 years from now, just like it did after the attack in 2014. When the war actually started, then there was a ceasefire, and then it re-attacked again in 2022. And on a very personal note, my son is 11 years old. I don't want him to fight in another war. I want to make sure that he's safe from the need to fight, because his dad is in the military right now, and that is not the choice that he was willing to make, but that is the choice he had to make. That is not what I want for my child. That is why I share this understanding that there is a need for long-term military aid to Ukraine. Otherwise, this will erupt in a new war again in 5-6 years.
Ina Sovsun, thank you so much for being with us from Kyiv. I want to thank Charles Kupchan for being with us from Washington. General Trinquant, Ambassador de Grigny-Asti, thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.